Chapter 3. The Midnight Alliance. The cell block was entirely silent, except for the rhythmic, low snoring of exhausting laborers and the distant dripping of condensation echoing down the stone shaft. The harsh red security lights had been dimmed to a dull, blood-colored glow for the night cycle. In their shared cell, Ralph sat upright on his stone cot, his back pressed against the cold rock wall. Sleep never came easily to him on Clison, but tonight his instincts were buzzing like a live wire. Across the narrow corridor, the golden light of Ruth's private section was dark. He knew she was safe, but the sheer unpredictability of their captivity kept him on a permanent edge. Beside him, Robert was asleep, his chest rising and falling evenly, while young Jake was curled into a ball on the floor. Suddenly, the air in the cell shifted. There was no sound, no clicking of a lock, no heavy boot-fall of a Krigere guard. But Ralph's eyes snapped toward the darkest corner of the cell. A shadow thicker than the rest seemed to detach itself from the wall. Ralph was on his feet in a fraction of a second, his fists raised, stepping instinctively between the shadow and the sleeping kid. "Who's there?" he hissed, his voice a razor-thin whisper. "Lower your guard, human," a calm, low voice replied from the dark. Before Ralph could strike, the figure stepped forward into the faint red light. It wasn't a giant Krigere guard. He was slender and muscular, with long brown hair, framing a sharp, calculating face. He wore dark, form-fitting tactical gear, and the hilts of two wicked-looking daggers peeked over his shoulders and pointed ears like the guards. Robert sat up instantly, his hand dropping to the floor to find a loose piece of rock to use as a weapon. Jake stirred, blinking sleep from his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. "You're not one of them," Ralph whispered, his eyes locked onto the intruder's hands, watching for any sudden movement toward those blades. "How did you get past the perimeter checkpoint? Who are you?" Ralph asked. "My name is Trogon," the stranger said, his voice entirely devoid of fear, "and I am the only reason you three and the woman across the corridor are going to survive the week." Ralph scoffed softly, though he didn't lower his fists. "We're doing just fine on our own. The guards leave her alone, and we keep our heads down." "You are fools living on borrowed time," Trogon replied coldly, crossing his arms. "I have spent the last 7 days watching you from the cliffs. I have mapped the guard rotations, the patrol paths, and the security grid. My plan to dismantle this facility was flawless, but the variable has changed, and our time just ran out." Robert stood up slowly, keeping his body between Jake and the stranger. "What do you mean our time ran out? Warlord Van isn't supposed to land his dreadnought for another 2 weeks. We've been counting the days." Trogon turned his sharp gaze to the older man. "He was arriving in 2 weeks, but word reached his flagship about the Earth woman you are guarding so fiercely. I overheard from the guards Van is consumed by the news. He altered his course yesterday to claim her before the High Council can intervene. He isn't arriving in 2 weeks, old man." Trogon paused, letting the weight of his next words settle heavily in the damp air of the cell. "Warlord Van arrives in 7 days. The color completely drained from Jake's face while Ralph's fists slowly lowered, his mind instantly racing through the catastrophic logistics of a shortened timeline. 7 days meant no time to coordinate a labor strike, no time to dig a tunnel, and no time to find a way out. 7 days, Robert repeated, the gravity of the situation hardening his jaw. He looked Trogon dead in the eye. "You said our time. Why do you care if Van comes early? What's your play here, assassin?" A dark, dangerous fire lit up in Trogon's eyes, a look Ralph and Robert could easily recognize. "Warlord Van took everything from me," Trogon whispered, his hand drifting naturally to the hilt of his dagger. "I came to Clison to ensure he never leaves these mines alive. But I cannot breach his inner sanctum alone once his personal guard lands. You want your freedom and the safety of that woman. I want Van's blood. It seems we have a common enemy." Ralph stepped closer to the stranger, his massive frame imposing, but his voice stayed in a razor-sharp whisper. He looked into Trogon's calculating eyes, taking complete control of his emotions. "All right, assassin, we have a deal," Ralph said, his jaw tight. "We help you get your shot at Van, and you get us a ticket off this rock. But let's establish the ground rules right now." He pointed a heavy finger toward the dark corridor where Ruth's cell was. "The woman comes first. Her safety is our absolute priority. If your plan for revenge puts her in jeopardy, or if you try to use her as bait to draw Van out, the deal is dead. And I will break you in half before the guards even know you're here. Do we understand each other?" Trogon didn't flinch. A faint, respectful nod was his only response. "A dead target is my only priority, human. How we keep your asset alive is of no consequence to me." "Good," Ralph muttered, finally lowering his guard completely. He turned back to Robert and Jake, his mind already shifting into overdrive. "We have 7 days to plan this all out." Trogon tilted his head slightly, his sharp eyes narrowing as he looked at Ralph, then back toward the dark hallway. "We can plan all we want, but there is a logistical hurdle we must address. Communication." Ralph and Robert exchanged a confused glance. "Wait a minute," Ralph muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "We aren't speaking an alien language. We're speaking English. You're the one talking like you grew up in the States." Before the tension could rise again, Jake stepped forward from the shadows, a faint realization dawning on his face. He looked at Trogon, then at Ralph. "He's not speaking English, Ralph," Jake whispered urgently, his eyes wide. "And we aren't speaking English to him either." Trogon's gaze shifted to the young man, a glimmer of genuine appreciation in his eyes. He reached up, tapping a small, nearly invisible metallic mesh woven directly into his jacket. "An atmospheric audio translator," Trogon explained. "It captures localized sound waves, strips the phonetic syntax, and rebroadcasts the intent directly into the auditory cortex of anyone within a 3-meter radius. To my ears, your Earth language is mapped directly into my home dialect." Jake took a step closer to Trogon, a sudden spark of confidence replacing his fear. "I can be your ears, Trogon," Jake said determinatively, "for close-range conversations like this one, especially when you cannot pick up the low-frequency, long-range chatter from the guards down at the end of the corridor. I know what the guards are saying when they think no one is listening. If you're planning an ambush in 7 days, you're going to need me to relay the base's internal movements." Trogon stared at the kid for a long moment, assessing his posture, his heart rate, and the sheer utility of his offer. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto the assassin's face. "An organic cryptographer," Trogon murmured, nodding slowly. "Imperfect, but highly efficient for localized reconnaissance. You just became the most valuable asset in this cell, little human." Trogon leaned in closer, the faint red light catching the sharp angles of his face as he shifted into pure military execution. "If the boy is my ears, then you two are my hands," Trogon said, looking towards Ralph and Robert. "To kill a warlord on a fortified base, we must first blind the beast. Tomorrow morning, your focus shifts from survival to sabotage." Ralph crossed his arms, his tactical mindset locking into place. What's the target? The lower trenches of Sector 4 house the main, localized cooling conduits, Trogon explained, drawing a miniature digital map from his wrist gauntlet that projected a faint, holographic grid of the mine. They are powered by the heavy energon deposits you extract daily. The Krigere uses that grid to power the internal communications and the launch pad for all aircraft. Trogon pointed a slender finger at a central junction point on the map. During the afternoon shift change, the grunts are sluggish from the heat. I need you, Robert, to cause a distraction. Anything loud enough to draw the guards' attention away from the secondary junction box behind the primary drill. And that's where I come in, Ralph deduced smoothly. While they're busy dealing with Robert's mess, I slip behind the drill and cut the line. Not cut, Trogon corrected. If you sever it completely, the diagnostic alarms will alert the command deck instantly. You must overload the regulatory valve by exactly 3 turns. It will cause a slow, systematic build-up. To the guards, it will look like a standard thermal malfunction caused by the twin suns. But in exactly 6 days, the entire grid will blow, knocking out internal communications right as Van's dreadnought enters the landing sequence. Robert looked at the holographic map, tracing the escape routes with his eyes before looking back at the assassin. It's risky. If Ralph gets caught near that valve, they'll throw him into the deep pits. Then do not get caught, Trogon replied coldly, extinguishing the hologram with a flick of his wrist. We have 6 days to set the stage, and 1 day to execute. Sleep now, humans. Tomorrow, the war for your freedom begins. With a fluid, imperceptible movement, Trogon stepped backward into the deepest shadows of the cell. Before Ralph could even blink, the assassin had vanished back into the ventilation shaft, leaving the 3 men alone in the silence of the blood-red night.